Welcome to Monday Night Live. Thanks for joining me this evening. First of all, do me a favor. If you're watching on either YouTube or on Facebook, go ahead and smash the like button so I know that you can hear me. We will be taking, or I will be taking questions during the show tonight. I'm going to have to keep looking over here to the side just to check the question bar. We're going to talk about traveling through Canada because there's some really important things that you need to know about. And for example, here's a piece of information I found in Travel Weekly. And it was a question about a legal issue, but it illustrates the point that we're going to talk about very well. In this case, there was a family of 10 people. They were going on an Alaska cruise that departed out of Anchorage. They get into Vancouver, and the grandmother can't be there. They basically won't let her into Canada. And so they make her turn around and get on a flight and go back to the United States. In this case, and I mean, she couldn't go in and stay in Canada just to get from the airport to the cruise ship. They would not let her do it. And it was because she had a drunk driving conviction on her record, in the past. So this family of 10 people decided to turn around and they all went home. Now, you think about what that meant for that family, because they lost the airfare that they paid. They lost the full price of the cruise. It's quite probable that travel insurance didn't cover that, especially for the grandmother. It might have covered for the rest of the family. That'd be kind of one of those things, depending on exactly how the policy's worded, whether or not it would include that. But here was a family of 10 that lost an entire vacation and all the money associated with it because of something that happened to the grandmother years ago. So the question that we need to talk about is what do you have to do? What are the conditions that could cause a problem for you? And also, is there anything you can do about it? So to start with some of the conditions, and you'll have to excuse me, I have slides today. I don't normally like to use slides, but I think that this information is important enough that you need to be able to see it while we talk about it. On the screen's a list of some of the things, and these are just some of the things that could cause you not to be admitted into Canada. And it's interesting. We'll talk about the various ways you might be trying to get into Canada and the impact that it would have on you. The dangerous driving is, you could think of it as reckless driving, as in the United States. So you could have a reckless driving, a DUI, all these things, and you didn't even have to have been convicted for them. You just had to be arrested for them. And then the person that's making the decision on you, they have to make a decision. Do they think that, when you were arrested, based on what they can see of your criminal history, whether or not, you're safe to let in or not. And it's very, from the information I could find, it's very subjective, which it adds to the frustration. And it's definitely a challenge. So here's some things that you need to know. This applies even on flights. And part of it, it's the point there I make, that it depends on the agent you're dealing with, because the agent has some discretion about whether or not he can let you through without any issues, whether he can require you to fill out and request a temporary residence permit, which is not really a residence permit, but it's just basically a request to pass through Canada. And that form is strictly up to his decision whether or not to let you through. And to apply for that form, it costs money. So that's just an ugly situation to be in. We can go back to the case I mentioned at the front of this. He chose not to let the grandmother in just to get from the airport to the ship because of something that was in her past record. There's a new law in Canada that was passed in 2018. And so here's a list of some other things that can be added into reasons not to let you in. The one that might get people sometimes is operated with a suspended license. The reckless driving, I mentioned it earlier. So again, all of these things are things that could keep you from being able to get into Canada. So now what happens if you try to get into Canada, or you're flying or something? Well, if you're flying internationally and connecting in Canada, it depends on the airports that you go through, because some of the airports, and I didn't look at the exact list, but probably the more major international hubs, they may have the ability for you to make a connecting flight without actually ever going through Canadian customs. That does not apply if you're having to recheck your baggage. So if you're traveling on an airline where they don't have a interline agreement, so that you can't check your luggage all the way through to its destination, then you're going to have to go through Canadian customs. And at that point in time, that's where the roadblock would pop up. If you don't have to recheck your bag, and the airport does have let's call it a bypass route that lets you get to the waiting area for your next flight, then you're probably going to be okay. And I say probably, I wouldn't want to bet my vacation or my business trip on it. If you're traveling on a cruise ship, then it's a little different, because you're probably not going to be able to get to that cruise no matter how you want to do it. If you're trying to depart from Canada, they're not going to let you, as we saw in the case of that grandmother, they're just not going to let you into Canada. And if they don't let you into Canada, what they require you to do, and sometimes this means at least escorted by an immigration or agent or a police officer, sometimes handcuffed to them, you have to go get on the next flight back to the United States. And based on what I saw, they don't really care if it's back to your hometown or just somewhere in the United States. But they have to get you out of Canada on the next available flight. And that's at your expense. And it means that, it could be hugely expensive. You walk up to the airline counter and you need a ticket, and the airlines that flight's full except for first class. You may be in a situation where you have to pay for a last minute first class ticket one way, which is about as expensive a way to travel as you could. Okay, so if you're coming into Canada on a train or driving in, you're probably, again, not going to be able to get, driving in, definitely not going to be able to get in. On the train, probably what they'll do is they'll either make you just move over to the U.S. Customs, because going into like Vancouver, at least, Customs is in the same space for both Canada and the U.S., and get on a train back to the U.S. But they're not going to let you do what you want to do. You can just pretty much take that to the bank. If you're getting off of a ship that ends in Canada, like say you take a southbound cruise out of Alaska into Vancouver, what's going to happen is they're going to make you get the first available flight. And so you may have a weekend scheduled in Vancouver, and your flight's not for 2 days later. You're going to be in a situation again where they're going to take you to the airport, and you're going to get on the first available flight, no matter where it is. So you could live in New York City, and they may put you on a plane to Miami. And again, you're going to have to pay for it. So again, it's a very awkward situation at the very least. But there are some things that you can do about it. And this is the purpose of this discussion, is to go over what you can do about it, so that, if you have something on your record that you have a concern about, one of the first things that you can do is you can go to the Canadian Embassy, or a consulate or something, somewhere that they handle immigration, and get basically get them to check your record and see if they'll let you in. They may look at it and say, yeah, that's not a problem. They may say, no, you'll either need a temporary residence permit, or you're going to need another way of dealing. And we're going to talk about 3 different ways of dealing with it. The first one is you're at the border, you're talking to the immigration customs guy, and he says, nope, you can't get in. Well, at that point in time, you can ask for a temporary residence permit. You're going to have to pay $200 in Canadian for that, and it's non-refundable. The person you're talking to that just told you no is the one that is going to make the decision on whether you can get in or not. Now, not saying that because he told you no with it before you asked that it's still going to be no. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that it's that, if he's having a bad day, it could be a bad day for you. So you really don't want to put yourself in that situation. So I just make the statement that it's the least desirable method. You want to do anything that you can to avoid getting into that situation. The next thing that you can do is you can apply for a temporary resident permit before you book your travel. It costs you the same amount of money, but at least you'll know before you get to the border on your way to the cruise ship what your situation is going to be. And so this is better than doing it at the border, but it's still not your best option. Your best option is to apply for what is called criminal rehabilitation. You'd go to the Canadian consulate and you can get the forms that you need to take in, and it tells you what documentation you need. And so you can get all of your paperwork together and go to the consulate to submit the paperwork. It's going to cost you the same, if my memory serves me correct, it's the same $200 fee. And there are some conditions. It has to be 5 years have to have passed since you completed your sentence. So let's say that they sentenced you to 5 days in jail and 5 years probation. Well, it has to be 5 years after that 5 years of probation. In general. Or it has to be 5 years after you were arrested if you weren't convicted. Now, if you weren't convicted and there's, reasonable grounds, that's probably a situation that that 5 year waiting time may not apply. Again, the thing you have to do is just fill out the paperwork and take it in. But if you have, what I'll say right now is that if you have anything that worries you on your criminal record, and you want to make a transition through Canada, I would very definitely at least have my records checked there to make sure that there's nothing that's going to hold me back. Because, like I said, if you do it in advance, you can find another plan if you need to. If you're traveling internationally, maybe you can find a way to make a connection that doesn't take you through Canada, for example. But you want to make sure that you know this before you start booking your flight, booking your tickets. And the nice thing about this, boy, that's good spelling there. Then the nice thing about this is if you do this, what happens is it takes this item off your record permanently. So, for example, let's say that you were arrested for reckless driving. It's past the 5 year time frame. If you get the temporary residence permit, like we talked about in the previous two slides, what happens is that every time you need to go into Canada, you're going to have to go back through that process. If you go through the criminal rehabilitation process, then that offense is completely removed from your record as far as Canada is concerned, and you'll never have to worry about it again. So this is your best choice. Now, I am going to put up for you guys, let me ask, any questions? I have people on from both, looks like Facebook and on YouTube. Does anybody have a question? Linda asked, what can they do ahead of time? So ahead of time, go to the consulate, request a review of the records, and then from there, what you can do is apply for the rehabilitation. That would be the process I would choose, Linda, because it is just so important that you get this issue resolved even before you book your tickets. I can't stress that enough, because you wind up getting past the final payment date and realize you've got a problem. That's money that you can't get back. Anybody else have a question? And I don't see any other questions. So what I'm going to do is in this document, there are the links to the Canadian sites that deal with these issues. I did quite a bit of research, and these seem to be the official answers from the Canadian government. There are a lot of lawyers there, and if you get in a situation, there are a whole group of lawyers that are available if you Google the issue. But I think that in most cases, unless you have a huge need, because to pay what a lawyer is going to charge you, I would start by trying to do the applications myself, as it would be my recommendation. Anyway, in the comments, both on Facebook and in the comments on YouTube, there's going to be a link to this PowerPoint presentation, and these links are live, so you can just click on them, and it'll just like that, it'll take you to the site. So it makes it easy for you to, and since there you go. So this is the one for the link is for temporary resident permits. And it goes in and gives you all the information about it, how it's processed. One other thing that I did see and I forgot to put on the PowerPoint is that these processes can take up to a year. So what I would, I'm going to come back to your question in 1 second. So if you're going to do this, what you want to do is try to do it as far in advance as possible. It doesn't say it always takes a year. It just says it can take up to that long. Linda asked, what if your cruise ship stops in Canada? This is easier to deal with because if you have an issue and it stops in Canada, you just can't get off the ship. As long as you stay on the ship, it's not a problem. And so as long as you don't start the cruise or end the cruise in Canada, then it becomes much less of an issue. The challenge is that for northbound and southbound cruises in Alaska and a lot of the New England cruises, they either start or stop in Canada. And so that's when this would come into play. If you're just, like I said, if you're on the ship, they'll just make you stay on the ship. You can't get into Canada, but it's on the ship is not considered into Canada. So that works out okay. Did that answer your question, Linda? And did you have any other questions? I'll give her a chance to respond. And anybody else has a question, go ahead and post it as well. Like I said, the Canadian website was really pretty helpful, I thought. What I would do is like I said, if you think you might have a challenge, I'd go look up the information. I'd have a conversation with them about getting my records checked just to make sure that you don't wind up with a disaster. Because you think about that family that we started this show with, 10 people lose their vacation, they lose the full cost of their cruise, they lose the cost of their return flight if they can't change the tickets, and if they had to get expedited, if they had to pay for a, like I said again, first class ticket back home. All of that is a hugely expensive. In fact, it was expensive enough that they were trying to sue the travel agency because the travel agency didn't tell them that. And the opinion was in the article that it wasn't the travel agent's job to tell them that. And I would say this, and this is not a comment about travel agents, because travel agents do a great job in helping their customers, but they can't know everything. And you can't expect them to tell you everything when you're supposed to, some of this really falls on you. So, again, my suggestion is to get prepared, make sure you know the answers. Okay. Glad that answered your question, Linda. I appreciate everybody that's been watching the show today. Next week, we're going to, next week, I'm going to just I will be releasing a new video. I'm going to be in California in a meeting, but I will be releasing a video on Monday night for the Monday night show. The following week, we have a tour guide from Nova Scotia. I think it's Nova Scotia. Anyway, we have a tour guide that's going to be on that handles tours in Canada and New England. I thought that'd be kind of interesting because I've been focusing kind of on the Caribbean and on Canada. So I thought we're going to start trying to widen it out and bring people in. If you guys that are listening to the show, if you have any suggestions about a destination you'd like to know about or a guide that you think would be a good guest, please feel free to put that in the comments as well, because I'm always trying to get people on the show that are interesting and that bring value to my audience. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.